All right, get the dump button ready. Albert Breer is here. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good.
What are you going to see out here? I mean, we don't even really know what to see, especially first day in pads. It's a mystery almost.
Yeah, it is. And, what I'm interested in is just how different it looks. And, I said to Mike Brock a little bit ago how weird it was to go to New England during minicamp and see what that looks like with Bill pulled out of the equation. And I'd assume I'm going to probably feel the same way coming out here and not seeing Pete out here.
What do you make of some of the low win total projections that we've seen for the Seahawks?
Yeah, somebody was just saying 7.5.
7.5 is Vegas. We've seen as low as 5. Brock seems to think it's going to be a whole lot higher than that.
Yeah.
I don't have a clue what this team is going to do, if they're going to win 11 games or win 6. But why doesn't the league seem, or the national attention seem to be too high on them?
I mean, sometimes people are just bored. You know what I mean? I honestly, if the Seahawks had, gone and hired Jim Harbaugh or gone and hired Mike Vrabel, you probably would be looking at them differently. There's a lot of unknown with Mike Macdonald, And so, I think that's part of it, and that it's not on my training camp trip, it's not like this was circled as I got to get there first day. I was with the Chargers the first day because they hired Jim Harbaugh, So I think that's a part of it. I also think it's a lot of, there's a lot of young players that are working their way into becoming bigger, more well-known names, but aren't that well-known yet, So what does Charles Cross become at left tackle? What does Devin Witherspoon become at corner? What does Jackson Smith and Jigba become at receiver? Where's Reek Willen at corner? All of these pieces that they have that I think are really good young players, are all of those guys all at once going to take a step forward? I think that's, a big piece of the equation here. And then, the big obvious question, and this goes for both Seattle and New England, is what happens when you pull that guy out of the equation? What happens when you pull the guy who was driving everything here out of how this whole thing comes together? Because, let's face it, when one coach is in one place for such a long time, it's been built a certain way for such a long time, and bastardized is probably the wrong word, but it becomes so specific to that one person. You know what I mean? The way he wanted it. What does it look like when somebody else is coming in, especially somebody coming in from the outside like it is here, and is putting his own spin on it? I think there's a lot of unknown with that, too.
You think part of it is right above us here is John Schneider and all the management team.
Yep.
Right around the corner is Eric Kennedy, the equipment manager for the last 30 years. Right behind you is a weight room with coaches that did not change. So much did not change. So much of the foundation, and Jody Allen was very clear with that. She did not want to blow the whole thing up. She just kind of wanted a new set of eyes and ears and younger teachers, I think, on the staff. Is that or maybe different than a New England situation?
Well, I think, when talking to John about it a little bit, over the last, 6 months, I sort of got the idea, you hit the nail on the head there, Brock. They wanted a fresh perspective and a new start, but they didn't want to abandon everything that they had here. And, one mistake a lot of people make with Pete, it's funny. I was having this conversation with Jed Fish, who's, the head coach at the University of Washington now, a couple summers.
Bow down! You do it! Sorry.
And
tone it down.
He was saying how, Jed coached for both of them. And Jed had said to me how he thinks the two guys are actually really more similar than people realize. It's just packaged very differently. But as far as wanting competition and wanting a really physical team and, having very demanding practices and very demanding training camps, that's all there. That was all the same. It was just how Bill dressed it up was very different than how Pete dressed it up, But if you take the window dressing off, a lot of the foundation actually wasn't that different. And I thought it was so interesting that he said that. And I sort of feel the same way about Mike Macdonald and where he's coming from, coming from John Harbaugh's program in Baltimore. I just talked about how demanding it is, how physical they want to be. Well, that's sort of what the Seahawks have been, right? Yes, it's a positive, uplifting environment and all of that, but it was also a very demanding environment. And for all those years that they had the great teams, the players weren't enforcing that, And so, I think that's what's so interesting about this is that it's a guy coming from a completely different program that has no background here, has no background with Pete Carroll, yet a lot of the principles of that program he's coming from mirror what Pete Carroll built.
It feels like one of the big differences may be not just in terms of the culture and all of that, but Pete felt like he was always looking at the macro, looking at the big picture about the energy, the feeling of the team, coaching the culture more than the individual adjustments in each game and week to week. Whereas Macdonald seems like he really, being a defensive coordinator as recently as last year, is here to get the most out of some of these guys, maybe more specifically with coaching adjustments.
Right, and that's going to be interesting in how he balances it. And I think that's always with a young coach. A challenge is finding that balance, because I think these guys, when things get tough, what do you default to? It's like I default to what I know. Well, and this is why they hired me. They hired me because I ran a great defense in Baltimore. So I'm going to run that defense here. When being a head coach is a completely different job.
Do you like that he's going to be running the defense here?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. You just have to have balance to it. You know what I mean? Like a good example is I'll go back to McVay. McVay and what he does in Los Angeles. He hired John Stretch from Mike Vrabel's staff in Tennessee to be his game management guy because he knows as a play caller, he's going to have to delegate some of that stuff, right? And Kyle Shanahan for all those years in San Francisco had Mike McDaniel with him. And people don't understand how important McDaniel was to him. But if you look, all the guys who coached under Kyle, there was one guy who followed him to every place, and that was Mike McDaniel. And he was the one guy that no matter what, that was the non-negotiable. He's coming with me, And it was because, Kyle really trusted him. And then when he became a head coach, he was able to delegate things to Mike, So, I think that's – you can do it. You can definitely do it, and that's been proven, with Andy Reid and with Sean McVay winning Super Bowls, right? But if you're going to do it, you better have some good people around you that you trust that you can delegate to. And, with a staff that's kind of brought together guys from all over, I'm sure it's been a process for Mike in figuring out how all that's going to set up if he's going to call the defense for the entire season.
You mentioned boredom and laziness when it comes to some of these win totals with different pundits around the league. I would say this, Bert. I would answer that question, and some of this is built on being at my Fox seminar last week and talking to some of my Fox NFL colleagues, and I think part of that number is Geno Smith. That no matter what Geno does, no matter how well he plays, how efficient he is, how good the next level numbers are, how many fourth quarter comebacks last season.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just no matter they will not let go of that narrative that was written, and that's the one that's cast. And he is just he's good, but he can never be great. And I just don't buy that.
Yeah, and I've gotten to know Geno better over the last couple of years, as I'm sure you guys have too. And I just really like his approach. He's the right kind of guy. It's just, and I honestly don't understand why. Now I'm not saying he's Patrick Mahomes, okay, but for me, we saw Tua got the contract over the weekend, right?
Yeah.
Would I rather have Tua than Geno Smith? Maybe not. You know what I mean? I think Geno might have played better. When you look at what's around him and the changing circumstances around him and everything else and what Tua has around him, and that's no knock on Tua, but I think Geno's played at that level. Again, I'm not going to put him with Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and again.
But Jared
Mahomes,
Goff,
obviously.
Trevor Lawrence, Tua, all of them making $50 million a year.
Yeah, he can be that guy, and that's the thing is I look at Baker similarly. Brock, I might take Baker over Tua. And I know some people would look at me like I have four heads when I say that, but Baker's become a really good player. Baker was a really good player last year in Tampa. And would I rather have Baker at 30 or Geno at 25 than maybe some of these other guys at over 50? Yeah, I would.
You can see Baker light while you're here in Sam Howell.
Yeah.
He looks just like Baker out there, but he has not looked nearly as good as Geno.
I guess it's been a rough
the difference.
Start. Yeah,
it's not been a fantastic start for him.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. The Commander staff, they really liked him. going into last year, and really felt like some of his talent was overlooked. And I think it's, again, this probably goes back to John Schneider's time, in Green Bay under Ron Wolf for all those years. Like, just keep throwing darts at quarterback. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you have an opportunity to bring one in that you think's got some promise, whether it's in the draft, trade, whatever, just keep throwing those darts. I think it's a smart gamble. It's a guy who's started some in the league. You always want quarterback depth, and there's upside there because he's still young. But they raved about him in camp last year. I know it didn't work out perfectly, but he was also in a really rugged situation in Washington too.
Of those 6 that you have already seen, and I'm curious where this roster looks to your eye.
Rams. I think the Rams are going to be really good. I think the Rams, what they did last year.
For goodness sake, golly,
they lose Aaron Donald. That's tomorrow.
When are they going to stink?
I know.
Ah.
The Seahawks have the misfortune of me seeing the Niners right after them, and their camp is always very aggressive and very impressive. Here's the thing about the Rams, and I think this could affect the win total too, is the division that they're in, right? Obviously, yep. I just think you look at where the Rams were going into last year, and it was supposed to be their reset year, and they were taking on $75 million in dead money, and Stafford's coming off the elbow, and Kupp is all beat up, and for them to be able to come out of that and have a first-round pick for the first time in 9 years, and to have young players coming out of last year like Puka Nacua and Kobe Turner and Byron Young, and then I go to their practice last week, and you see the energy and how it seems to have just breathed life into that team. What happened last year? I'll say it now. I would not be stunned if the Rams were in the Super Bowl. I don't know if I'll pick them, but I would not be stunned if they wound up in the Super Bowl.
How was Arizona?
I think Arizona's getting better. They're so young, though. It's 24 draft picks over the last 2 years. I will say the staff really loves Kyler, and Kyler's been able to flip perception a little bit there. He's been a good leader. He's been in the building a lot. The offseason's his first few years. He's spending a lot of time in Texas. He didn't do that this year, or his first year with this staff, and so and that number 18, the rookie from Ohio State, can really play too.
Who do you need to see out here? You're going to be here for the day. Where will your eyes go? What young players or even veteran players? Who's on your list that you have to make sure you watch for a few minutes?
I'd say I'm really interested to see Weatherspoon, because he was drafted as a tone setter. You know what I mean? He's the kind of guy that you want him to be a captain. You know what I mean? You think he's going to become a captain, and he was such a clean prospect coming out. So seeing him from a tone-setting standpoint, all of that would be cool. I think the receivers around Metcalf are interesting. I'm not up to date completely on who might be hurt or whatever, but Jackson Smith and Jigba would be.
No one.
They're good.
There's no one hurt right
okay,
now.
because I'm always hesitant when I go on before these shows. So
there's nobody hurt.
Shoot, I hope I'm not naming somebody who has a hamstring, and I just didn't know it. But yeah, I'd say Smith and Jigba is another one who I think has a chance to be a really good player and complements DK in a very real way. And then the pass rush, because it's such a big part of what they were able to do in Baltimore is, how they make things that are simple for the players look complex, but you need strong DBs, which I think the Seahawks have, and then guys who can get after the passer to pull it off. And so, I don't know, your Taylors, your Maffes, those guys, it's kind of that position group is kind of like the whole team, where it's you have these young guys and they're pretty good. Now, can they take it to another level? You and I talked about that, Mike. I think that's just that more or less determines how far the team can go, right? It's all the second and third year guys that they drafted and they've spent time to developing. Are those guys all going to start breaking?
A name you didn't mention was Byron Murphy. When you get eyes on him,
I'm interested to see him too.
Tell me if you think he's built like Aaron Donald, who I've never seen really in person up close like this.
So
his legs are he is a uniquely built human being.
One thing about Murphy that's really interesting is the Rams wanted him pretty bad, and the Rams were once Bowers came off the board, the Rams were working it to try and trade up for him, and I know there were other teams below the Seahawks who were doing the same thing. And I think a huge part of it was he was very clean character-wise and is sort of seen as like this, like, again, a future captain. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what Donald had. Like, that's sort of what Donald was obviously like enormously talented, but it was also like the guy worked his ass off and set the tone for everybody. And I'm not saying Murphy's going to be Aaron Donald as a leader, but like the pieces are in place for that, which I think is why he was so sought after before the draft. And the Seahawks, I can say this too definitively, they were stunned he was there. I'm sure you guys know that, right? Like they were shocked that he made it to them. So. You look at like what Mike Macdonald did the last couple of years with Justin Madubuike, who, went from a good player into a complete monster who's now one of the highest paid defensive players in all of football. I think Madubuike would probably be the model for what they think Byron Murphy can be in that defense.